Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. This is one of my favourite sci-fi franchises, with both movies being absolute masterpieces. Each poses a question about what it means to be human, and both films have so much depth to them. Throughout this video we're going to be going through both and breaking down all the hidden things within. If you enjoy, please hit the thumbs up and make sure you subscribe for videos like this every week. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Blade Runner. Based on the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, this Philip K. Dick adaptation might be one of his best known works because of how much of a cult following the film has. I think it's one of those movies that catapulted the author to the point where his name's up there alongside Stephen King, and that he's someone who can go on the poster alongside the director and cast. Philip K. Dick is a name that sells the movie, and everyone in Hollywood at some point has been after some Dick. Everyone in Hollywood at some point has been after some Philip K. Dick. His work's been adapted into films like Total Recall, The Adjustment Bureau, Minority Report, and many, many more. Now, the name Blade Runner doesn't actually feature in the book, and this was something that was brought across from another science fiction novel that the creative team owned the rights to. According to the Now Playing podcast, a Blade Runner referred to someone who smuggled medical supplies like scalpels in a dystopian future, but they liked the name because it just sounded cool, which, to be fair, it does. Now, replicants are also called Andys in the book, with Deckard being a bounty hunter instead of an officially sanctioned officer. The book gives a lot of the backstory that isn't really touched upon in the film, and it's important to bear in mind that this is a post-World War III world in which a lot of the planet's been destabilized by an unnamed global catastrophe. Earth is now highly polluted, and there's been major environmental fallout from this, which is why LA looks like London. It's a far cry from what we know the city to be like today, and it's constantly raining there, and only ever shown to us at night to cement this idea. Now, in order to escape the fallout of the planet, humanity has ascended to the stars, and the UN's encouraging off-world emigration to several colonies that exist on other planets. In the book, they try and lure people out there with an incentive involving getting a free android, and this will hopefully get the species to leave Earth. Each human is given one as a servant. If you use the discount code Heavy Spoilers at checkout, you get a free one, and thus they can live affluent lifestyles amongst the stars. Now, those left on Earth do so because a lot of them have either mental or physical defects. During the war, the toxin fumes that entered the atmosphere caused people to mutate, and this is why J.F. Sebastian is rapidly aging. There's also Gaff, played by Edward James Olmos, who has those iconic blue eyes, and several of the characters that we meet have something slightly off about them. Now, there's this idea throughout Blade Runner that the closer you are to the ground, the more impoverished you are. We don't even meet the people off-world, and they're very much seen as being the elite. You have to get an elevator up to visit Tyrell, and the blimps belong to the corporations that now control the planet. Even though the movie has flying cars in it, you might notice that there's not actually that many, and this is also done for a specific reason. The ones we tend to see belong to the authority figures like the police and Blade Runners, showing how they exist above the majority of the population who have to inhabit the surface.
You know the score, pal. You're not cops, you're little people.
It's also a beautiful shot of people riding on bikes, but in a futuristic world, this just denotes how much they're part of the lower class. Now, owning animals is also seen as a symbol of wealth that exists throughout the movie. When the toxic pollution hit the air, this killed a lot of the wildlife, leading to almost all animals going extinct. Because the pollution spread throughout the atmosphere, it killed the birds off first, most notably the owls, which we see one of at Tyrell's. Later on, Pris makes this comment,
"I'd be working in a place like this if I could afford a real snake."
And there's this idea that animals have become replicants just like how the humans have. Now, animals are given a lot more emphasis in the book, with Deckard owning replicant sheep that he keeps on his roof. Deckard is killing the Andys so that he can earn enough money to buy his wife a real animal, which he eventually does in the form of a Nubian goat. However, this is killed by Rachel, and the story actually ends with Deckard coming across a frog on a hillside which he ends up taking home. He believes it's real, but they discover that it's a replicant. However, in the end, they still decide to take care of it. Now, that's a very important theme that things lays throughout the movie, and the film wrestles back and forth over whether replicants are real or not. In most science fiction stories, robots may look like humans on the surface, but once you get below the skin, you'll see their mechanical parts and also the machinery. That isn't really the case with Blade Runner. The replicants appear to be humans, both outside and in. They are 99.9% perfect copies of us, and the only difference is that if you used a microscope and zoomed in on their bones, you might see a serial number there or something to denote they were manufactured. Beyond that though, they are identical to us except for one thing. The machines don't have empathy. This is what the Voidcom test carries out, and it's believed that if you ask a replicant enough questions, that over time you'll realise they don't have emotions. Thus humanity's very much been able to separate them from us and classify them as less than human because they don't have a quote-unquote soul. Eyes are said to be the windows to the soul, and throughout the film we get several ties to them. The Voidcom test takes a large focus on eyes, and in the scene with James Hong, we watch his character Hannibal making eyes for the replicants. Tyrell's eyes gleam out at us, and the character is killed by Roy pushing his thumbs directly into them. The opening shot of the movie has several cuts of eyes in it as we travel through the sky, and it's clear this is important to pay attention to. I think the movie really asks the question over whether replicants actually have souls, and in all honesty, I find myself siding with them over Deckard and the other humans. It's important to bear in mind that all of the replicants are slaves, and that they've been manufactured to serve humanity rather than being a part of it. The word robot itself actually comes from the word robotnik, which in Russian means worker or labourer. It's basically seen as someone who does all the heavy lifting with very little else in their life. I think that the replicants definitely carry this idea. They were used to colonize other planets and explore the hazardous landscapes that they contain so that actual humans wouldn't be harmed when visiting them. They've all been given extremely short lifespans, and the movie centers around a group of them who've returned to Earth in order to extend theirs. They're painted out as desperate and sympathetic characters that clearly have emotions so that we feel bad when we see them die. Juxtaposing this, Deckard doesn't really come across as your typical hero, and in the movie, the two replicants that he takes out are women whom he shoots in the back. Zora's death is shot in slow motion, and the way she falls makes Deckard seem like he's just killed one of the hero characters rather than a villain. He chokes Rachel at one point, only lives at the end because Roy allows him to, and yeah, he's not exactly a stereotypical good guy. Deckard is very much meant to be like a replicant himself in that he isn't supposed to have emotions, and in killing these replicants, he should remain detached. However, we see him drinking constantly throughout the film, and I've often seen this as being because it's something that eases up the guilt he carries over murdering sentient life. It adds extra layers to the film, and it was also pretty clear to me on this watch through that there were lots of themes about God and creation laced throughout it. Now that's a bit obvious, but there's a key change in the versions that adds something else to the final cut. Bit of a tangent here, but there were several versions of this film released, with the theatrical cut being what was put out originally, obviously. This was then followed by a director's cut before the actual director's cut, the final cut, was put out in 2007. Reminds me of when you do 50 different edits and you just put final on the end of the last one, even though you know you're going to be doing about 15 more edits down the line. Anyway, the final cut has a slight change in it when Roy visits Tyrell. In the original version, he says,
Death. Death. Well, I'm afraid that's a little out of my jurisdiction. I want more life, fucker.
Whereas in the final cut he says,
I want more life, father.
It's an extremely subtle change, but altering fucker to father is done for a very specific reason. Father is a name that we often use when referring to God, and this is Roy meeting his father. Now, Playing pointed out that the film is laced with this idea of killing our creators, and in humanity creating replicants, we've now killed God because we don't need him anymore. We also have the biblical imagery of Roy getting nailed through his hand, which seems to me to be a pretty on-the-nose crucifixion nod. Anyway, the father line is barely noticeable, but it adds so much more to the concepts in this movie. Now, there are some other changes in the film from the other versions, most notably the narration, which, yeah, if you've seen, you can tell Ford f***ing hated doing it.
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession. I didn't know whether Leon gave Holden a legit address, but it was the only lead I had, so I checked it out.
It's so phoned in, and Ford originally had agreed with Scott that there'd be no narration in the movie. According to the documentaries, Ford spent months with Scott working things out so that everything would be in the movie without the need for voiceover. However, after the studio saw the film, they wanted some clarity added to it because of how unclear things were in the test screenings. Ford was called in to narrate, and he said in interviews that he went in kicking and screaming because it didn't represent Ridley's vision, and it was commissioned by people who had no interest in showing that. A separate writer was hired to pen these scenes who didn't know much about the film, and Ford said that he went in to shake his hand in the recording studio, but the guy just ignored him. "What's wrong with you? It's Harrison Ford." So his plan was basically to record the lines as badly as possible, because he thought there was no way they'd actually use them, and I imagine his surprise when they showed up in the theatrical release.
4 years, he figured. He was wrong. Tyrell had told me Rachel was special, no termination date. I didn't know how long we'd have together. Who does?
It does sound terrible, to be honest, and when you hear it, you can instantly tell why the theatrical version's harder to find than an iPhone that still has Flappy Bird on it. Honestly though, after hearing it, I kinda want Harrison Ford to badly narrate my life.
All I could do was sit there and watch him die.
Now there are some other small changes in the theatrical and director's cut that was put together in a great video by Sticky T. It's 17 minutes long, but some of the changes include that Ford's face has been digitally removed in a scene with Tyrell. We can also see a thumb on Roy's shoulder in the phone booth, and this is because that was a flipped image from later on in the movie. Deckard's lip sync is corrected for the booth scene, and we also get a face replacement when Zora dies so that the stunt woman swapped out with a real actor. There's some minor differences to the unicorn dream scene, and Roy is later added to the window of the skyscraper to just create more intensity in that scene. Lastly, the backdrop of the dove shot is slightly different, and in the final cut they use a building that's more in line with the skyline of the city. Now as for the movie itself, we start off far in the future, in the year 2019. What?! Anyway, we learn that the advanced Nexus 6 models started a mutiny on an off-world colony, and since then it's been made illegal for them to journey to Earth. Blade Runners have been tasked with quote-unquote retiring any models that journey to our planet, and the Void Comp test is used to fish them out. We begin overlooking the LA skyline, and this effect with the fire and lightning was done through using a miniature with flames superimposed over the top of this. Flame is of course chaotic, and this juxtaposes the rigid and immovable structures that exist in LA. It's dark, bleak, and completely devoid of nature, stripping away any true beauty from the world. This is almost a hellscape, with flames very much giving us the idea that something terrible has happened in the world to change it to this industrialized landscape. As mentioned earlier, we get a close-up of an eye in this scene, and this is meant to symbolize an all-seeing eye looking over everything. There's lots of things open to interpretation here, but I've always took it as humanity now being like a god because they can create life, and this is why it's put here. The city is reflected in the eye too, and this shows what humanity's created with its newfound power. We then see a giant pyramid with a man in the window looking over all, and as we learn this is someone setting up the Void Comp test for Leon. Pyramids carry their own subtext, and they were owned by the pharaohs who ruled the lands of Egypt. Slaves were used to build them, and all of the architecture that we see in the film was likely built off the back of replicants who were forced into labour. This man very much decides who lives or dies, and in many ways he can be seen as a god, passing judgment on the replicants. However, just like how humans rose up and defied God, our creations are doing that too, and Leon murders the interviewer after being triggered by the questions. Now, the questions here revolve around a tortoise being turned over on its back, which in the scenario Leon refuses to help. All of the Void Comp tests in the film feature some sort of animal, whether it's the tortoise here or the wasp later on, and animals are actually thought as being a way to teach children empathy from a young age. Deckard asks Rachel,
You're watching television. Suddenly you realize there's a wasp crawling on your arm.
I'd kill it.
This is actually referenced later on in Blade Runner 2049 when a bee lands on Kay's hand but he doesn't kill it. The Void Comp test is also purposely set up to be similar to the Turing test. Originally called the imitation game, this is a test that measures whether a machine can pass as a human or not. It was heavily referenced in the film Ex Machina, and its basis here is to see whether someone is a replicant or not. Leon is also asked about his mother.
My mother? Yeah. Let me tell you about my mother.
Later on we hear a repeat of this scene, however the tone is different.
My mother? Yeah. I'll tell you about my mother.
This shows that memory and emotions can be affected, and that they may alter the way that we perceive things. There's also a subtle change in Leon's eyes, and we see that they sort of gain the reflective gleam that the eyes of the replicants are shown to later have. This is a sign that the facade is slipping, and that he's finally close to getting caught. Now from here we go to the skyline of Los Angeles and see a giant geisha on a billboard. The city that we see is highly influenced by Asian culture, including neon dragon signs in the next shot, Japanese umbrellas, and street vendors that are out selling noodles. I've seen lots of theories about what this signifies, with one even saying that this shows the World War was between Japan and America. According to the theory, the Japanese won, and this is why they're so heavily integrated into everything. Other theories have said it represents globalization, and that it plays into the idea of Asian superiority, which was a fear at the time amongst some circles. This was during a big boom in which many of our items were made in Japan and China, and this film was potentially depicting the eventual conclusion of this. Now, Deckard can be seen reading a newspaper, and this has the headline, "Bombing the Oceans, the Moon, and Antarctica." These are all extremely hazardous locations to visit, and it shows how much we've stripped the planet of its natural resources. Below this we can see a smaller one that reads, "Worldwide Computer Link-Up Planned," and this actually predicted the internet, which wouldn't be made until 1989. In the sky we can see a large blimp advertising the off-world colonies, and this is attempting to lure people out there so that we can leave Earth. Deckard grabs some noodles, which is when he's approached by a police officer and Gaff, who speaks in a foreign language.
Monsieur, Admiral Kovachin Engam Bite.
He say you under arrest, Mr. Deckard.
Now, this was actually invented by Edward James Olmos, and the language itself is called City Speak. It's a mix of Japanese, Spanish, German, and English, and it shows how much the world has come together as one, with us all bleeding into this melting pot. Now Gaff pretends that he can't speak English throughout the movie, however we learn at the end that he in fact can.
I guess you're through, huh?
Finished.
It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
However, there's a little clue that he can, as when he starts up the police car, he understands the English instructions given to him.
Final descent. Now on glide path, on course, over the landing threshold.
Now Deckard is taken in by him, and he passes a booth that says VidPhone, which shows people were well aware back then that we'd all be FaceTiming in the future. In the car we also see a screen pop up with Purge on it, and this is Ridley Scott giving a little nod to his prior movie Alien, in which the same graphic was used. They travel to the police station, and I love how you can see other cars parked on the roof. I never really noticed this stuff until the 4K Blu-ray came out, and I definitely recommend that if you love the film you pick that up, because there's so many extra things you notice in the movie just off the back of it. Now his old boss Bryant reveals why he's been called in, and during this moment Gaff makes a little origami animal. Gaff is someone who constantly taunts Deckard throughout the movie, and he even insults him when using the city speak. Now this is because he was the one who wanted the job of hunting down the replicants, and the fact that Deckard was picked over him rubs him the wrong way. However, in the end he lets both Deckard and Rachel live, and shows them mercy due to the fact that he doesn't kill her. Instead he leaves behind a calling card, which is an origami unicorn. Now as we see in the movie, Deckard has dreams about a unicorn, and this could indeed signify that he's in fact a replicant. As we learn in this beautiful narration from the theatrical cut.
4 years, he figured. He was wrong.
Yeah, the lifespan was changed in the case of Rachel, and there may be something similar within him. 2049 never clears it up, but let me know your thoughts below on whether you think he is one or not. Personally, I just prefer the idea that we have a Blade Runner falling in love with the thing he's supposed to hate, and it shows that replicants have souls if she's able to love him back. We'll talk more on it at the end of the video, but the origami could be seen as an indicator as to why he's indeed an android. Origami uses man-made materials to form something that's supposed to imitate an animal, and this is similar to how replicants use man-made materials to imitate living beings. Gaff doing this could be him further taunting Deckard, and he makes a chicken when he turns down the job. This obviously, well, he thinks he's a chicken, and later on he leaves a man with an erection in Leon's apartment. This is after Deckard interviews Rachel, and it's meant to show that he's attracted to a replicant. Now the unicorn comes at the end, which I promise to go more in depth on, but it shows these all have their own meaning that ties in with Deckard. You could say the one with the erection has its Deckard. For sake, I'll just leave.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Now Brian shows Deckard the footage of Leon's interview, and he talks about how 6 replicants came to Earth, but that 2 got fried trying to storm Tyrell's. This is why they later use Sebastian, because it allows them to go on as a Trojan horse and pass all of his security measures. In the other versions, the dialogue is slightly different, and it says that only one got fried, which led many to think that Deckard was the missing fifth one. However, this was more of a budget issue, and there was supposed to be an extra person called Mary who was wounded after they stormed Tyrell's. They did have scenes with her, but they just never got around to filming those bits, and the dialogue said that one died out of the 6 until they changed it to 2. Now Brian shows the data that they have on all the replicants, and this includes Pris, who we learn is a pleasure model.
The foreskin job is Pris, a basic pleasure model.
Ironically, she was created on the 14th of February, which is of course Valentine's Day. Now pleasure models are of course another word for sex slaves, and it shows that the replicants have been forced into every aspect of their life. We later learn that Roy is in love with her, and I've always kind of viewed this as being similar to Spartacus, where we have a slave falling in love with a servant and then rising up. When Pris dies, she spasms out on the ground, and this was meant to be almost like an orgasmic death, tying back to her purpose. Daryl Hannah is behind the pot, and Quentin Tarantino later referenced this in Kill Bill when she writhes around on the floor. Now at this point, Deckard's sent over to the Tyrell building in order to see if the test works on the Nexus 6 that they have there. It's thought that these new models might be so advanced that the test is now out of date, and that replicants will eventually hit a point where they can outmaneuver it. Brian touches upon this and says that the 4-year lifespan was built in as a failsafe in case they develop emotions and start to rise up and disobey their masters. At Tyrell's, Deckard meets Rachel, and she asks him,
"May I ask you a personal question?"
Sure.
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
To me, this is almost like a Voidcom test in itself, because she's trying to see if she can stir emotions out of him. I think if you're killing people that are so similar to humans that it would indeed cross your mind, and with the test now almost being obsolete, it shows that mistakes can be made. Now the book has her doing something slightly different to the film, and Deckard stays with his wife in the end, even though he and Rachel sleep with each other. In a nice little twist in that, Rachel tells him that one of the fugitive replicants is the same model as her, and thus he'll have to kill someone that looks identical to the person he's fallen in love with. This is somewhat touched upon in 2049, when a version of Rachel is killed in front of him. Now in the book, Rachel admits that she was programmed to seduce bounty hunters like him so that she could turn them away from their missions. You could see that as being something that's in the movie too, and with her being an android, you might second guess whether she actually loves Deck or if she's merely dissuading him from his job. Now at this point we meet Tyrell, played by Joe Turkel. He's someone who's featured in our classic movie breakdowns before, and you might recognise him as playing Lloyd the bartender in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. There was actually going to be a major twist with Tyrell, and I kinda wish that they kept it in the movie. At the end when Roy killed him, he was going to realise that he was a replicant, and then he'd travel up into the pyramid and discover a tomb. This was where the real Tyrell's body was housed, and we learned that he'd been dead for 40 years. This unfortunately never made it to the film, but I think it would have added a great reveal to that final act that might explain more of Roy's madness. Tyrell then says,
I want to see it work.
Where's the subject?
I want to see it work on a person. I want to see a negative before I provide you with a positive.
What's that going to prove?
Indulge me.
He raises his hand almost similar how Jesus would when pardoning people, which I might be reading into, but it's just something I noticed. Anyway, Rachel shows how advanced that the new Nexus models are, and she takes the longest to fail a test out of any replicant that's came before her. I think it's also worth pointing out that Nexus means a connection, or series of connections linking two or more things. These are clearly the bridge between humanity and machine, and likely the next step in our evolution that will allow us to travel further into the stars. Once more, the questions are linked with animals, and she's asked about what she would do if she was given a cat skin purse, a jar full of butterflies, and the wasp that we talked about earlier. The film is shot with fade-ins and outs showing how long it goes on for, with her failing the final question about being presented with a boiled dog. At this point, her pupil doesn't change or alter, showing that she has no emotional reaction to it, and thus she fails the test. Deckard then realizes that Rachel doesn't know she's a replicant, and he says,
Respect, how can it not know what it is?
Again, this ties into the idea that Deckard could be a replicant too, and that he wouldn't know if he was. He doesn't really seem to have a personal life, and when we meet him, he's just sitting about with no real discussion of his backstory. It begs the question of whether you yourself would know if you were manufactured, if everything about you was identical to a human. If you were never told, then you could easily believe you were made naturally, which Deckard may be a victim of. Now we discover that Rachel was never told that she was a replicant, and they created an experiment in her to see if memories affected the machines. Rachel has had a real number done on her, and Tyrell's even given her photos of her as a child with a woman that she's been told's her mother. It's all used as a way to control her behaviour, and these experiences of the past enrich in her emotions, which is why she can last longer on the test than the other models. Deckard and Gaff then travel to Leon's apartment, and here the former finds a snake scale located in the bathtub. We see Leon watching outside, and then catch Deckard going through his belongings. In the drawer he finds a newspaper, and when he flips the cover over, we can see that this is the same one that Deckard had at the beginning. This could show that Deckard is indeed a replicant, as he potentially came to Earth at the same time that Leon did. Now, Harrison Ford was someone who thought that Deckard should be human because it shows that people can change and accept the replicants. Deckard's a character that's spent years killing these machines, and it's got to the point that it's made him completely empty. Thus, the only thing that makes sense for his character is for him to fall in love with one, which is the journey he goes on throughout this entire movie. However, Ridley Scott has always said that it was his intention that Deckard was in fact a replicant, which is why clues like this exist throughout the film. Ford and Scott didn't get along on set, and both have admitted that they actually hated each other. However, they've said that they've all put that behind them now, but obviously the question still hangs over the movie as to whether Deckard's a replicant or not. Now we see in the next drawer that Leon has photographs, including some of children, which again is a similar thing to Rachel. He too is being given this false past, and this is so that he can pass the Voight-Kampff test. However, because Leon is aware that he's a replicant, he's not capable of lasting as long as Rachel is. Now at this point we see Roy, whose hand's slowly starting to seize up, which shows that he's dying. His first words are,
"Time enough."
And this is of course something that he obsesses over in the film.
Time to die.
Now we cut to Hannibal Chu's workroom, and we see him moving eyes out of a container with Chinese characters on it. Failed Mandarin at school, but luckily the internet helped me solve it, and though the smaller characters are gibberish, the large one means eternity or long. Guessing this is saying that this is a long-lasting eye, which is similar to how we get long-lasting batteries. Now Chu can't help with longevity, as he just creates eyes, but he points them in the direction of JF Sebastian. We discover that Sebastian is rapidly aging, and thus he has some empathy for the replicants due to them both having shorter lifespans. At this point, Deckard returns home. He hits floor 97 in the elevator, and then when he goes to his apartment, we can see that the number is 9732, showing that this is the 32nd apartment on the floor. Rachel has gone out to his home, and even though she shows him a photo of her mother, he breaks the bad news to her. He does this by correctly telling her several of her memories, including a spider and its children that ended up eating her. These are similar to Deckard's dreams about the unicorn, and again it ties in with his idea of animals constantly appearing throughout the movie. At this point we see how cut up Rachel is about it, and realizing that she actually has feelings, Deckard pretends it's a joke. It doesn't work though, however it shows Deckard starting to see them as people rather than just being machines. She leaves and drops the photo because she's now seen the truth and has decided to not hold on to this past. Deckard picks it up, and you might notice there's a split-second shot where this photo actually moves and we hear the voices of children. Now photos like this were used by the corporation in order to trigger memories, and staring at one would bring the implant back up. This is why it moves, and it doing this for Deckard could once more signify that he's indeed manufactured. The photo also has writing on the back, and it shows the extent that Tyrell's gone to ensure the illusion's kept up. We then see Pris walking through the streets, which is when she waited out for JF Sebastian. Pris then runs off, and she smashes her arm into Sebastian's car, which gives us this.
Hey!
Now Daryl Hannah actually slipped when doing this, and she ended up chipping her elbow in 8 places. She carried on the scene though like a true professional, and being a pleasure model means she's adept at seducing Sebastian. At this point, we once more see a blimp overhead with a geisha on it. I think the movie is very much about accepting the other, and in many ways, America accepting Japan into their culture could be symbolic of how Deckard accepts Rachel. The movie is asking the question over whether it would be possible to do this, which the constant geishas could potentially symbolize. Now we then see Sebastian's home is filled to the brim with mannequins, and we learn that he lives in this giant building all by himself. This is likely because most people have moved off-world, whereas he's had to remain because of his disease. Being lonely means that he has made toys to keep him company, and the replicants prey on the character's loneliness. From here we cut back to Deckard, who's slumped over his piano, and this is the moment that he has the daydream about the unicorn. Interestingly, there are photos above it, and these look somewhat similar to the ones that the replicants have. There's two people stood on the porch, just like Rachel and her mother, and also some that look like they're from the Victorian era. These could be showcasing that his memories are indeed plants, and that these photos may potentially trigger the unicorn vision he has. Deckard then decides to scan one of Leon's photos, and we get one of the movie's most famous scenes. Now this picture itself is somewhat of an Easter egg, and it's based on Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait. Both have a circular mirror at the back of them that contains a hidden detail, and Deckard discovers Zora when looking at it. He matches this up with a scale and then travels out in the city, which is adorned with Japanese signs, swordfish being sold like a wet market, and an eagle perched on someone's head. This is actually an area where replicant animals are sold, which is why we later see ostriches being moved through and ponies being sold off. Deckard goes to a snake seller who eventually leads him to a dealer, and this is the person that points him in the direction of Zora. On the way we catch geishas dancing with hockey masks on, once more showing the mixing of the cultures. Deckard drinks the night away, drunk dials Rachel, and finally Zora emerges as an exotic dancer with a snake. Now, this actually belonged to the actress Joanna Cassidy, and this is why she felt so comfortable with it in the scene. Realizing that Deckard is a Blade Runner, she makes a Blade Runner for it, which leads to Deckard chasing her throughout the streets. Every person he bumps into has their own religion and culture, with this being a diverse street full of religions, lifestyles, and all different walks of life. Oop, Atari symbol at the back, you might notice that. Now Deckard finally catches up with Zora, which leads to him shooting her in the back as she crashes through some glass. As Deckard walks in closer to her, we can see mannequins dressed in sexually provocative clothing, and this deliberately looks identical to the clothes Zora's wearing right under her coat. These mannequins are all being held up in glass displays, and Zora crashing through glass is supposed to be symbolic to how they are here. The glass boxes with the mannequins in house these sexual objects, and they're there to just be consumed. This is very much the case in Zora 2, and even though she's managed to break through the quote-unquote glass box she was in, she was still killed. Now in the end, her death's filmed like a tragedy, and Deckard is clearly shaken up by it. Bryant then arrives and tells her that Rachel's done a Blade Runner, and that she's now been added to the list of targets. We see that the police number is also 995, which I think might show that 911's been changed, but that might be a reach. Anyway, Deckard doesn't have to look far for Rachel as he catches her across the street. However, before he can go to her, he's grabbed by Leon, who attempts to murder him. He does this by trying to push his eyes in, and this is similar to how Roy kills Tyrell later on. We know that these underwent the same combat training, and this is likely why they carry out the exact same killing method. Rachel saves him though by shooting Leon in the back of the head, and from here we cut to Deckard and catch him drinking a shot. Really nice bit of attention to detail here, and I love how the glass fills with blood as he sips away, showing he's still bleeding from the fight with Leon. Now at this point he sees more humanity in Rachel due to her shaking after just killing Leon. Deckard says that he gets his too, and it shows that there's this side within him that knows he's not just killing machines. Rachel asks if Deckard ever took the test himself, and again, this is meant to make us question whether he's human or not. Rachel goes through the photos on his piano, and in the theatrical cut, the narration tells us that replicants are obsessed with them. They have such short lifespans, and they take photos because it's a way to hold onto their memories and show that they were real. Roy at the end says,
All those moments will be lost in time. Like tears in rain.
And he's very much showing that they need to take photos to record what really happened. Rachel changes her hair after this, and she opens it up in order to mimic the photos slightly. This could be part of her programming to seduce Deckard, and at this point he's of course supposed to be hunting her. She plays the piano perfectly and recalls her memories of her lessons, which are of course fake. Now the pair get it on after this, and we then cut to Pris spray painting her eyes black. She does this because she wants to look like one of Sebastian's toys, and is now a fake person designed to be a real thing that's having to try and look fake so that she can blend in with the other creations. She then goes over to Sebastian, and you might notice that in the top right of the screen that there is a unicorn. This is the only time that one appears in the movie outside of the dream in origami, and it could be suggesting that because Deckard sees this, that Sebastian had a hand in his creation. Roy arrives and he says,
I like a man that stays put.
And this is because Sebastian was someone who wanted to move off-world, but he failed the medical, and this is why he has to remain behind. We then see Sebastian's chessboard, and learn that he has an ongoing match against Tyrell. The board is filled with animals, and there's also a giant ostrich calling back to the ones at the bazaar before. Now Sebastian wants them to show off their abilities, but they protest and say that they're more than just computers. Chris says, "I think, therefore I am," and this is a phrase that was first coined by the philosopher Deckard. He pondered whether his existence was real one day, and wondered whether he'd be able to tell if this world was a dream or not. If it wasn't, then this meant that nothing he believed truly existed, and thus he questioned whether he really existed too. However, he realized that because he's at least thinking that he does indeed exist, even if he's out there in another reality, imagining the world he now finds himself in. Now they convince Sebastian to take them to Tyrell, and Roy picks up to eyes again, calling back to this iconography that appears throughout the movie. Now they go to Tyrell's, which is when Roy instructs Sebastian on how to beat him at chess. This shows that the Nexus models have surpassed their makers, and are now capable of beating humans at everything. They run through multiple scenarios in order to try and see if there's a way to extend the life of the Nexus, but all attempts in the past have proven to be fatal. It's very much about how we can't escape our fate, and that in the end we all must die. Roy is referred to as the prodigal son, and this again ties back to the Bible and religion. Roy kisses Tyrell before killing him, and Sebastian is filmed standing behind canals which resemble bars holding him back. After his car is almost robbed, Deckard goes into Sebastian's building, which is where he faces off against Pris, who becomes almost doll-like. Again, mannequins surround this location, along with the toys that she's seen as being equal to. She almost kills Deckard between her thighs, again tying back to the idea of her being a pleasure bot. Now Deckard then kills her, and this leads to the final showdown with Roy. Very over the top, and Roy toys with him and breaks his fingers after pulling his hand through the wall. Deckard takes a shot at Roy, who makes it seem like he's missed. However, we see in the next moment that his ear is in fact bleeding. Roy mourns Zora as he gives Deckard a countdown to escape, and he taunts him through the scene by singing opera and showing that he clearly outmatches him. Roy is very much just spiraling into insanity, and he knows that even if he wins, he still loses because time is running short. This very much flips the script, and we see the hunter become the hunted as Roy chases after him. It's brilliant watching him howl at the moon and run through the shadows, and it leads to one of the most memorable scenes in cinematic history. Now Roy and Deckard are meant to be extremely similar at this point, with them both being badly wounded. The pair's hands are both seized up as well, and it's meant to show Deckard that they are both very similar. On the roof, Deckard makes a leap to another building, and though Roy could let him die at this point, he decides he has to save him. Though Deckard has killed the woman he loves and all of his friends, Roy still pulls him in, and it's supposed to carry the message of forgiveness. The replicants are better than we are, and he of course has a nail in his hand evoking images of Christ, and just like him, he turns the other cheek in order to become a savior. His final act of life is to show pity, and this makes you question whether the corporations hunting him were truly just in what they wanted. Now Roy discusses his life, and he says,
"Seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched C-beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate."
It's something that really sticks with you, and it shows just how precious life is. Rutger Hauer actually wrote this monologue himself, and the things mentioned in it have been used widely in science fiction. For example, the Tannhauser Gate has popped up in a number of different things, and it potentially pulls from Richard Wagner's adaptation of The Night Tannhauser. This was a character that fell from grace in the eyes of God, potentially like how Roy did with his own creator. Either way, he dies holding a dove, which he then releases into the air as he passes away. Symbolically, doves are meant to represent the human soul, and him doing this potentially shows that he did indeed have one. Deckard witnesses this completely blown away because he's just seen that the replicants are indeed alive. Now, an important thing to bear in mind about this movie is how language is used to make it so that people seem less than human. For example, they say that replicants are retired instead of killed because to kill something means that it was alive. You don't say you killed your computer when you turn it off, and this is a similar thing when it comes to them. Roy saying that it's time to die also means that he was alive too, making this a very important line. Gaff then drops a line about Rachel, and Deckard returns home to find her under a blanket. Initially, we are led to believe that she's dead, but Gaff's allowed her to live, and this means that she and Deckard can have a life together. They don't know how long that will be, but they go on the run, and Deckard once more becomes the hunted as they go out to some banging synth music. Now, I showed you the versions before with the narration, but that's pretty much what was originally intended for the film. There was a lot of shots of the hills and countryside used for this, and they actually compiled a lot of the B-roll from The Shining for these moments. Kubrick filmed a ton of things for the intro, and as Warner Brothers owned both, they just decided to save Scott some money and use it there. Now we also know that they did have a life together because of 2049, and that the pair also managed to go and create a daughter. That's a breakdown for another time, but we do have the unicorn being left at Deckard's that we have to discuss. Now, the most obvious signifier here is that Gaff's used origami to taunt Deckard throughout, and this signifies that he's a replicant. It ties into his dream of the unicorn, and it's very much Ridley Scott's vision of the ending, which has been left in the final cut because that's what he intended. There was also a deleted scene with Gaff in which he says, "Are you really human? It's hard to tell around here." And the fact he's overlooking Deckard's operations could show that they don't fully trust a replicant running around. However, he did cut this scene, and this could be to make this ending more ambiguous. Scott has said that people can take their own meaning from it, and that he's not there to say what's right and what's wrong. Harrison Ford also, of course, worked alongside him to make this movie, and as we mentioned several times before, he thinks Deckard is human. I go with that more because it means that this movie is about a person who's been tasked with retiring these machines, who in the end realizes that there's more to them than meets the eye. There's not really that assessment there if he's also a replicant himself, so that's what I tend to side with when I'm watching the film. Now, the other way to take it is that Gaff knows Deckard has Rachel, and that he views her as being a unicorn. To get a unicorn, of course, means to get something unique, and Rachel herself is one because she has an extended lifespan and takes longer to fail the test than any other replicant. This could mean that Deckard has found a unicorn, and Gaff's allowing him to keep her as a sign of respect for completing the job. Deckard seemingly nods when he sees it, and whatever meaning it has, he understands why it's there and somewhat accepts it. In the end, I think there's probably enough things in the film that you can really support any conclusion if you look at it close enough. And that's also what I believe is the beauty of Blade Runner. One of the greatest films ever made, depending on what version you watch. The movie has influenced so much, and I hope you enjoyed going back through it with us. Okay, so Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favourite sci-fi films of all time, and I might even put it up there as being better than the original.
What?
Yes, I know that's blasphemy, but Denis Villeneuve created an incredible sequel that I think builds perfectly on the first film, whilst also crafting its own story and characters that don't feel reliant on the past. It also manages to not anger fans by f***ing up characters like Deckard, and even things like whether he's a replicant or not are questions we don't get answers to. It feels like there's a real respect for what's come before, and throughout this video I want to go through the film scene by scene, and point out all the Easter eggs, hidden details, and things you might not know about the world. Now, in case you missed our Blade Runner breakdown, then there's a really interesting backstory to this world that doesn't really get touched upon in either of these films. The Blade Runner universe is post-World War III, in which chemical and nuclear warfare were used on the world, and in the aftermath of it, the planet was highly destabilized. Poisonous toxins were injected into the atmosphere, which killed most of the animals, and a large number of humans were left with mutations and also physical defects. For example, the first film had J.F. Sebastian, who we learned was rapidly aging. The sky was blacked out, and places like LA rained all the time now. The movie even ends with it snowing, and throughout Kay dons a big coat to keep him warm because of how cold it is. On the outskirts of LA, we also have a gigantic seawall, and this has been put in place to counter the rising sea levels. Now in his ride, we see Kay filling out a report at one point, and he does this on plastic instead of paper due to it no longer being so readily available. Very few trees exist on the planet, and this is why the one at the farm becomes so important. Now the plastic that he writes on also has a 1920s camera plate holder as well, showing how humanity has had to resort to modifying and recycling things from the past. Although Kay's jacket has sheepskin on it, the costume designer said that they made a point of only using fake fur in the clothing because almost all the animals are gone. Now this could also be a callback to the book that the series is based on called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, because we have an android wearing an electric sheep, even though he's really dreaming of Anna de Armas.
God damn!
Anyway, the locations really speak to how messed up the environment is and how damaged that the planet has become. Thus humanity has taken to the stars, and they've used replicants as a way to scout out hazardous planets. The replicants were very much slaves, but they weren't seen as being alive because they were synthetic. When they're killed, it's also called retiring because to kill something means that it was alive. As we saw in the first film, they were also given shortened lifespans, and this was so that they couldn't really do much with their life. Humans on Earth were lured into space with the promise of a free replicant, and they range from all types like the combat drones like Roy to the sex slave pleasure bots like Pris. The first film was very much about a hunter of these named Deckard realizing that they were human and learning to love one. The second film builds upon that, and we discover that he and Rachel actually had a child together. If humanity was to learn about this, then this would create more questions over whether replicants are real or not, and it would end up leading to further disputes. Now we actually see this playing out in the first of 3 short films that fill in the events between the last movie and this one. Much like the Animatrix, these allow the backstory to be told to us, and I hadn't actually seen them until I went back to the film for this breakdown. The first is titled Blackout 2022, and it tells of what happened with the replicant models after that first film. Directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, you might know him as being the man behind Cowboy Bebop. This movie actually also references the anime in its final few shots, and we have Kay dying on the stairs similar to Spike Spiegel. Now in case you haven't seen it, it basically talks about how the Nexus 6 was replaced by the Nexus 8. I don't know why we didn't get a Nexus 7, but it might be like how Apple skipped the iPhone 9 so that they could release the X in line with their 10th anniversary. Anyway, the Nexus 8 were given natural lifespans, and in response to this, human supremacy groups rose up that sought to take them out. The replicant registration database was created to identify them all, but all this information was lost during the blackout. The anime features a scene riffing on the first film, and we watch as Gaff and Brian go through replicant profiles. Amongst these we see Sapper Morton, and you might recognise him as being played by Dave Bautista. Now as we later learn, Sapper delivered Anna, and in military terms a Sapper is someone who's responsible for breaching walls. The infertility of replicants is at one point described as being a wall between them and the humans, and thus him helping with the delivery very much plays into his name. Now in the anime, a nuke's detonated above LA, which creates a blackout. This destroys all the records, and we end with the character Iggy removing his eye so that he can't be identified. We learn that replicant production was then prohibited, and in the wake of this, the Tyrell Corporation went bankrupt. Neander Wallace then acquired it and appealed the act, which takes us into our 2 other short films, 2036 and 2048. Both are actually directed by Ridley Scott's son Luke, and the first stars Benedict Wong and Jared Leto. The first one's about him repealing the replicant ban, and this is due to him predicting that if they don't use slave labor, that famine will hit the planet. Replicants are the workforce of Earth, and even the word robot comes from the word robotnik, which means slave. Neander gets the replicant with him to self-retire, and this shows how he can create them to obey, even to the point of their own end. Thus he sells them on never running, never rising up, and obeying humanity to all ends. Realizing replicants can be used as slaves once more, they lift the ban, and Wallace is able to start producing more. Now Leto provides a chilling performance throughout the movie, and this blind character brings a number of symbolic things with him. Firstly, we see later on that his home's adorned with large and expansive wooden walls. We get an idea of how much wood is worth from the dealer later on when the tiny horse that Kay gives over is said to be enough to buy a real one. As mentioned, real animals are almost extinct, and this hammers home the idea of how valuable this wooden horse is. The fact that Wallace's walls are built with wood as well shows how wealthy he must be, and as we mentioned earlier, this is because there's so few trees. We also have his chilling eyes as well, and much like the first film, they carry a lot of meaning with them. Now the first movie opens on a shot of an eye, as does this one. This is green, and as we later learn, Rachel's eyes were green too.
Her eyes were green.
Now the first film having a blue eye makes me think that it belonged to Deckard, and though the second could belong to Rachel, I think it's more likely that it belongs to their daughter Anna. The film opening with her eyes symbolizes that she's the key to everything, and it lets us know that she's the most important character. Replicants were of course identified with their eyes in the Voight-Kampff test, and here we learn that they're now identified by their eyes having serial numbers. Roy killed Tyrell by pushing his eyes in, and Roy even visited an eye manufacturer. Mentioned this all in our last video, but we surmise that this was done because eyes are the window to the soul. Now how does this play into Neander Wallace? Well, his eyes are covered with metallic contact lenses, and these allow him to see through the use of drones. Croft talks about movies pointed out that this shows he doesn't see the world through his soul, but rather through technology. This gives him a cold and emotionless view of the world, and having these tools also allows him to be like an all-seeing god. Tyrell lost his eyes in that very first film, and now we have his successor who doesn't have eyes at all. Replicants remove their eyes to hide who they are, and we also have Joyce whose eyes take an interesting turn in the film. Throughout she develops what I think could be genuine love for Kay, but she's eventually destroyed and we see an advert for her. This ad spouts off some of the lines that Joyce said in the movie, and she also refers to Kay as being Joe.
You look like a good Joe.
Earlier in the movie, this was her giving him the name because he was special, whereas here, there's a more sinister side to it. Being completely nude, she's clearly meant to be in line with a prostitute, and not to get into a breakdown of hooker terms, but men are often referred to being Joes by them. My wife's not watching this, is she? Well, I learned it from a movie, that bit. Now, she referred to Kay as Joe at several points, and this reveals that the girl that he thought was special is just a program designed to either love him or at least make him think that she does. In the scene, she also has black eyes, and this is possibly showing that she's just a soulless creation built for one thing. Her eyes are being stripped away because this Joy doesn't have a soul, she's just a product that's built to be consumed. There's even a boy version of her, spelled B-O-I, and these products are made solely to fill the isolation that people in this world feel. Now, the last short film is called 2048, and no prizes for guessing that this is set 1 year before the events of this film. In it, we follow Sapper as he protects a mother and child, and in doing so he outs himself as a replicant and thus has to go into hiding. At one point he shows her the Book of the Power and the Glory, which is about an outlaw priest who's trying to understand what it means to be human.
It's one of my favorites, I love it.
Bit on the nose, but the short ends with a witness calling the police to report Sapper as a rogue skin job, which sets up Kay hunting him down. And the movie, yeah, just getting to breaking down the actual movie now, that starts off like the first one with a big block of text. However, they do something really clever here, and they have the first word appear on the top left, which makes our eyes go to it. This is also how replicants are identified, and they have to look up to the left to show their serial numbers. At the heart of Blade Runner is very much this idea of empathy and learning to see the replicants as human, which puts us in their shoes. They are very much exactly the same as us on every level, except for that they have a serial number on them somewhere where we don't. This text crawl instantly puts us in their shoes and makes us do what they do from the start to subtly get us to side with them. It hammers home this idea of empathy, and Kay is even chosen because of his lack of it, which is what the baseline test checks for. We now have replicants hunting replicants, and originally they were designed to have no empathy. This is what the Voidcom test checked for, and they start to go haywire once too many emotional questions were asked. Now, after the shot of the eye, we cut to the fields of California to see giant towers and panels. These are laid out in a circular motion, and they're meant to mirror eyes, only this time they're synthetic. We watch as Kay passes over large fields of greenhouses, and though you might think these are fake, these are actually real. In El Hierro, Spain, there's over 26,000 hectares of them that create food supplies for the majority of Europe. Here we find Sapper working as a farmer to produce food, and outside of the tents we can see Russian text. Now, in our first film breakdown, we talked about how we thought that Japan were the winners of World War III, and this is why they were seen in every aspect of LA. I theorized that this was done because of Asian superiority fears that were prevalent at the time, and there were lots of Western organizations scared that the East would take over. This is because lots of our products were from Japan and China, and I think Ridley Scott cleverly placed this into the movie. Now, in this film, it seems like the Russians are now ruling, which is denoted by this text. Later on, we see some holograms, including a ballerina, and also the words CCCP. This implies that in the Blade Runner universe that the Soviet Union didn't split up, and that they now rule over America. The words that we see on the tent here actually translate to Seslina, and this is a reference to the campaign in the Soviet Union where workers were sent out to farms. This was in order to grow food, and we discover that this is a quote-unquote protein farm, which is basically farming grubs, because not many animals left. Now, in his home we catch a piano, and in the first film we learned that Rachel had memories implanted into her to make her believe that she'd taken lessons. She played the piano at Deckard's, and Kay later plays the E key to reveal a hidden Russian box, socks, and a photo. When Kay travels to Vegas, he plays this same E key as well, and it's calling back to that moment from the first film. Now, this scene's also a bigger tribute to that movie than you might realise. The first movie was originally supposed to open like this, and Denis used the original storyboards that Ridley and co created to map out this scene. In it, we had Deckard travelling out to a farmhouse where he killed the occupant, and this was to show how ruthless he was. Deckard waited in the house with a boiling pot of soup on the stove, and as the replicant returned home and went to stir it, he was shot in the back by the character. This was without Deckard saying a word, and it was meant to show us instantly how bad he was. Now, as much as I love that first film, we never really get the impression that Deckard's the ruthless scalp hunter that people make him out to be. This scene, I think, would have added to it, but it allows Kay to come across as completely cold and also remorseless. Sapper readies his scalpel, and we later learn that this is the same one he used to provide an emergency C-section on Rachel. She died during childbirth, but the baby was saved, and he plants the idea in Kay's mind that he's this way because he's never seen a miracle. He also says,
"How does it feel, killing your own kind?"
I don't retire my own kind because we don't run.
Now this is obviously because Kay's generation obeys entirely, however, we see him slowly learning the empathy he needs to escape. Kay then takes his eye, and he gets a call from his boss, played by Robin Wright. However, he's distracted after he notices some buttercups at the tree, and Robin Wright actually played the character Buttercup in The Princess Bride. Might be a reach, but Kay returns home, and you might notice that he's the only car in the sky. In case you missed our first video, this was done for a specific reason, and it's to show how the class system still exists in this world. The elites have gone to space, whereas those cast to the side have been forced to remain on Earth. Police have more power than those on the ground as well, and this is why they all have flying cars.
You know the score, pal. You're not cops, you're little people.
We see this represented later on when Kay returns home, and you can actually catch a VW bug. This opening approach also mirrors how the first film handled things, and huge shoutouts to Thomas Flight who put together a video of similarities. This includes the eye shot, and also how the vast and expansive skyscrapers are initially approached. We see the seawall here as well, along with adverts for Joy, and the LAPD building which looms over all. At this point we see the abuse that Kay is subjected to by the other humans, and we also get the first baseline test.
Interlinked.
What's it like to hold the hand of someone you love? Interlinked.
Interlinked.
Did they teach you how to feel finger to finger? Interlinked.
This is designed to trigger an emotional response from him by asking questions that humans may deal with. But the language here is based heavily around the pale fire. This is about discussing consciousness and what happens to it after we die. The film ends with Kay's death, and if replicants are indeed alive, then surely they go on the same journey that humans do when we pass. The Pale Fire is also the book that Joy holds up when they talk about getting something to read, but Joy says that she hates it. Now from here we get a shot of the street, and can also see a sign advertising off-world travel. This is what was present on the blimps in the first movie, and it attempted to lure people out to the stars. We can also see people riding on bikes, which calls back to the first movie, and you might notice a cheeky Sony advert as they distributed this movie. Whoa, what? Sony made this? Bloody hell, sometimes they don't make trash with Jared Leto. Okay, he shouted as he goes up the stairs, and we also see graffiti over his door. However, inside he has his own little bit of paradise, and this is alongside his AI girlfriend Joy. Now, though I think Joy eventually does come to care about Kay, early on it's important to bear in mind that she's very much a product. You can tell because there's actually some subtle things that she does, and this is very much to upsell things to Kay.
How was your day?
I'm getting cabin fever.
This is done to upsell the Emanator, and this will allow her to roam around outside. Little does she know that he's actually already got this, making me think that she suggested it several times, potentially as part of her programming. Now, though this gives her freedom, it comes with its downsides, as this is actually how Love's able to track him. Later on, Love asks if Kay is satisfied with her product, and this is clearly in reference to Joy. However, after that she says something similar to Joy, and to me this comes with the idea that Kay's also a product too.
I see you're also a customer. Are you satisfied with our product? I do hope you're satisfied with our product. I love you.
Wallace is of course the one who builds the replicants in AI, and thus he's very much having these two products fall in love. Now Joy is very much the evolution of Alexa, and she rattles off song facts and acts like a 1950s housewife.
Did you know this song was released in 1966 on Reprise Records? It was #1 on the charts.
Kay blows some smoke through her, and this glitches the hologram showing the RGB colours needed to present her image. He gives her the Emanator, and at this point we get several things about Joy that look like the menu on SmackDown's Creator Wrestler. Her ethnicity is Cuban, much like Anna's in real life, and her height is also 168 centimeters, which is Anna's height too. I'm not a stalker, yeah? It's on Google. Now as the Emanator powers up, we also get a line of legal text to the right, and this says that Joy and all of the technologies connected to her are property of the Wallace Corporation. We have the Wallace logo then pop up, and we get the idea that Joy doesn't really belong to Kay. The Emanator then plays notes from Peter and the Wolf. This is a Russian composition, again showing how the Soviet Union are the rulers of everything. The story itself is also about hunting, much like Kay's role, and in the end it comes with the moral that heroes must take chances like what we get in this story. Kay takes Joy up to the roof, and it's possible that this is a nod to the original book that the first film was based on. Deckard in that owned a sheep which he kept on the roof, and in that he was collecting scalps to get enough money to buy a Nubian goat. This is just like how Kay's saving up money to buy the Emanator, and the first thing that he does is take Joy to the top. On the roof we see a billboard that has a woman with white face paint on, and this is possibly calling back to the women from the first film. However, instead of being Asian, she is Caucasian, potentially showing the switch to Russia again. There are Japanese letters up here too, and these actually translate to Mobius Apartments. Huge shoutouts to AlphaCar22 on Reddit for pointing out that this is a nod to the artist Jean Mobius Girard, whose work inspired Ridley Scott when he was making that first film. Now this is a really sensual moment, and watching two pieces of AI fall in love makes me want to get my Alexa and Google Home and just bash them together. Delete that bit. Nah, it's such an interesting thing that I hadn't really seen before. But we see how it has its downsides as Kay gets a call that interrupts her. This is from his boss Joshi, and when he returns to work we learn that they've dug up Rachel's bones. I think this scene is really important as it shows just how similar replicants are to humans. They have the exact same stuff as us and are indistinguishable, except when you zoom in close enough that you can catch a serial number. This is done to give us the idea that there's not really any difference between us and them. They're just said to be machines, so we don't feel bad enslaving them. Being able to have children, and therefore being even close to a human causes issues, and the fear about replicants reproducing could once more cause a war. The only control that humans have is that we are the ones who make them, but if they can make their own, then there's gonna be no need for us. Thus they could wipe us out, and you can see how the fear of extinction would cause humanity to go and act irrationally. Kay is ordered to kill the child, but he becomes conflicted over this because being born means that it's alive. Replicants have been told that being born means they're real, and it's what gives them the self-perception that they don't have a soul.
To be born is to have a soul, I guess.
You've been getting on fine without one.
What's that, madam?
A soul.
Now getting political, but I think that replicants do have souls, and that the ending of the first film was very much about giving that idea. Doves symbolically represent the idea of a soul, and Roy saying that it's time to die shows that he was in fact alive. Anyway, cut to the city, and we then see an Atari logo. Though they're extinct now, the corporation was still going in the first film, so it's a nice little carryover to have the logo popping up here. Kay travels to the Tyrell Temple, and we learn this is now owned by Wallace. Cut to Love, who's basically a human trafficker selling slaves and pleasure models to a workforce in space. She suggests dialing down the humanity, making them just blank shells, and Love sees herself as being more than just a replicant. Kay even remarks on how he named her.
He named you. Must be special.
I'm here for Mr. Wallace.
Throughout the film, she's desperate to be seen as the best of the best. She seeks validation from Wallace in every single aspect, and I think one of the reasons she gets so angry when killing Joshi is that she sees a human he's not. This is someone who will protect their replicant more than Wallace ever will with her, and it makes her realise that he just sees her as an object. Joshi's basically putting her life on the line for what society deems as being a Tamagotchi. However, she still protects Kay, whereas Wallace would never do that for her. Wallace also refers to her as an angel, and this goes beyond just her protecting Kay from the sky later on. The replicant that Wallace got to self-retire in the short film was called Angel, and he's likely carried on this notion in his other right-hand replicants. Come the end of the film, we get a symbolic shot when Kay kills Love, and the lights over his shoulder appear almost like they're angel wings. The film is also set in LA, which, city of angels. Now Love takes Kay past the Nexus 8 models, which we can't show because of YouTube monetization. One of them actually resembles the engineers from Prometheus though, and the creative team did this as a little nod to Ridley Scott. They then get the Voidcom test files from the first film, and this has a question about the wasp landing on Rachel's hand.
There's a wasp crawling on you.
I'd kill it.
Later on, when Kay arrives in Vegas, a bee lands on his, but he doesn't kill it, whereas Rachel says that she would. This is him potentially believing that he's not a replicant, and the movie does have him questioning whether he's actually a person who's been tricked into thinking that he is one. It sort of flips the script on the first film, as in that we were questioning whether humans were replicants, whereas here, we're left doing the opposite. Gonna be honest though, I didn't really think there was any ambiguity, because as soon as we seen Kay getting Batista bombed, I knew that he was a replicant. But they do kind of go back and forth in the movie. Now Love says that it's nice being asked personal questions as it makes one feel desired. She's just seen as a replicant member of staff, and it's likely that no one ever asks her things because she's just seen as a slave. I do kind of sense some flirting between her and Kay though, as she immediately follows it up by asking if he enjoys work.
It is invigorating being asked personal questions. Makes one feel desire. Do you enjoy your work, officer?
She's very much flirting with him and likely trying to do what Rachel did by asking questions of him.
May I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Have you ever retired a human by mistake?
Love just can't get it right though, because her social skills just haven't been developed. Now from here, Kay goes to meet Gaff from the first film. I've seen some talk on Reddit about his headrest being a reference to Battlestar Galactica, and in that universe they use this to symbolise cutting corners and doing things as cheaply as possible. Gaff has been left in what seems to be an asylum, and he says he could tell something was different about Deckard because of his eyes. Replicants are identified by their eyes, and they do kind of play loose and fast with the idea that Deckard could be one.
Any idea how I could contact him?
He's no dish. Retired.
Retired is also a term that means to kill a replicant, and thus this may be him hinting at that being the case. Now we also create an origami sheep for Kay, and this of course carries its own meaning. In the first film he made a chicken to symbolise Deckard turning down the job initially, and this was then followed by a man with an erection. This was after Deckard met Rachel, and it culminated with a unicorn that could hold a number of different meanings. Kay's given a sheep because he's just following orders without question, and he's not special, whereas a unicorn is. I think the entire film is about Kay realising that he isn't really special, and this is quite a nihilistic thing. He's not the chosen one, the love of his life is potentially just programmed that way, and we'll talk about the hidden symbolism in his death scene later on. Now from here we cut back to Wallace's, and we can see water reflecting on the steps, which is another nod to Ridley Scott. He actually wanted a shimmering pool in the Tyrell Pyramid, but the production team, they put their foot down and spelled out why that wouldn't work, and apparently just said, I want it because it looks fucking cool. Now as she enters, Wallace says this.
An angel should never enter the kingdom of heaven without a gift. Can you at least pronounce a child is born?
This is language that pulls from the Bible, and again it's given the idea that Wallace views himself as a god and his replicants are his angels. He refers to replicants as being born, and this again shows that he views them as actual life. Leto actually wore grey contact lenses on set, and this made it impossible to see, so he had to be ushered around everywhere. It's called acting, shut up! Now interestingly, Denis revealed that originally he wanted David Bowie to play the role because of his real-life eccentricities. Sadly though, he passed away in 2016 and would have been gravely ill when this film was being shot. Now we learn that Wallace is trying to create replicants that can make their own children, and he brings in his drones to look over a new prototype. One of them stays staring at Love, and this is done to see her reaction to him basically killing a newborn life form. Tyrell talks about how every civilization's built on the back of a disposable workforce, but that we lost our stomach for using slaves. Because he's unable to create replicants and make children, he can't spread out as far as he wants to, unless he feels that humanity is trapped. He stabs the replicant in the abdomen, and this is in the same way that Love kills Joshi later on. She too copies her master's mannerisms, and Wallace kisses the replicant right before she dies. This is something that Love also does with Kay when trying to kill him, showing how much she wants to live up to Wallace. Now this is actually a callback to the first film as well, and Roy kissed Tyrell just before he murdered him. Now Wallace is frustrated that Tyrell managed to create replicants that could breed, and thus he sends Love out after Kay.
The best angel of all.
Now at this point we jump back to LA and catch the umbrellas in the street that were used at the beginning of the first film. We can also see a hologram, and this starts up with a woman dancing in it. This is actually Ana de Armas, and it's a nice subtle reference to Joy being customized and built for different audiences. You have the more classic home wife that Kay has, but there's also this seedier side of the AI that can be fetishized too. We can also see a screen in the top right with Kay's face on it too, and this shows that the group are actively looking for him. Now on the TV wall we can see a screen that says jiggity jig, and this is what JF Sebastian's dolls said upon him returning home.
Home again, jiggity jig.
Here we also see pleasure bots in full effect, and see that they also speak Russian, which, yeah, I'm doing your head in with that. Now Marriott stays and says that she's never seen a tree before, and she starts to flirt with him, but my man's loyal to Joy. Now at this point he returns to Sappers and discovers the tree has the baby's date of birth on it, which he then burns. We later learn that this date is inscribed on the bottom of the horse too, and thus it makes him begin to believe that he's connected to it. Although it's difficult to make out when we see it in the shadows, we can see that this horse actually has a horn in the middle of its head, meaning that this is actually a unicorn, tying back to the ending of the first film. Now Love kills Coco and takes the bones of Rachel, and later on this is used to create a duplicate version of her. However, just in the same way, we don't know if dinosaurs had feathers or not, Wallace isn't able to get things like tissue right, which is why the eyes aren't green. Kay tells Joshi about this wooden horse memory, and we see this playing out. There's a little clue here that this is actually Anna, as we see that she has long hair, whereas the boys chasing her have shaven heads. Later on when Kay visits the location, we can see the girls there have longer hair, whereas the boys are shaving, showing that the memory was of a girl. Now Anna being outside here could show that the immune deficiency thing that keeps her confined to a room is in fact a lie. In this world, I think knowing that memories could be implanted would actually make you question if yours were real or not, and we discover that she was told her parents went off-world. As we know, they are really Deckard and Rachel, so it shows how her entire life may be a facade. Anyway, we once more see the Pale Fire book on the table, and this is the only book Kay owns because it's likely all that he can afford. Again, paper's very expensive, but the fact that he has this shows how reliant he is on it for the baseline test. Kay travels out to look over code, and we see what makes a replicant. It's quite complicated code, and Joy says that she's more simple, existing of ones and zeros. This is of course binary code, but Kay replies by saying,
Half as much, but twice as elegant, sweetheart.
Now Tyrell said something similar in the first film when he remarked on the replicant lifespans being candles that burn twice as bright but half as long. Now from here that led to the Moral Coal Orphanage to track down the records of the replicant child. We hit up San Diego and see it's been turned into a dump, which is a far cry from the whale's vagina that it used to be. Now out here, Kay's spin is attacked with what I think is a kite that then travels up into the clouds and gets struck by lightning. Might not be that, and I'm probably wrong, so yeah, let me know if you actually know, because it looks like that, but it may just be a standard EMP. Now Joy is shorted out because of this, and it's kinda heartbreaking watching her glitch out when trying to wake him up. Now as the spinner is swarmed, we see how Love once more acts like a guardian angel, raining down missiles from the sky. Seeing her killing countless people while getting her nails done shows how detached from humanity that she is, and her eyes are covered during this to represent the soul she lacks. This is also from a god's eye view, and I think that it's ironic these people were probably pushed out of their jobs because of AI, and they're now being killed by it, showing how much technological advancements have stopped our species. Now Love is of course keeping him alive, and this is so that she can find more out about the kid. Anyway, at the orphanage he meets Mr. Cotton, played by Lenny James. James said that Cotton used to be a schoolteacher, and it was through this that he was entrusted with the orphanage. However, he's turned it into a child labour factory, and he has children picking away at the scrap metal from the dump to make himself richer. He tries to sell the kids at first, but when Kay reveals his badge, his tune quickly changes. However, he does say something interesting.
Bigger than you were trying to shut me down, bigger than you, and they were men at that.
And though we don't know who this is, it could be due to him housing the replicant child. It may also be Sapper due to his comment about them being big, and potentially they tried to free Anna after she was sent here. We do know that people have been snooping through his stuff recently though, and they likely went to him because we discover he kept physical records that weren't damaged by the blackout. He had a page torn out which the child's data was connected to, and after noticing a horse ashtray, Kay decides to go to where his memory was. Now we're told in this film and the first that replicants don't have memories of things that really happened because it's illegal. If they were to encounter the location in real life, then it may cause an existential crisis in which they question their own identity. Ironically, Anna is a memory designer, and though she avoids using her own ones, she implanted some of hers into all the replicants, which ends up bringing them together. Later on with Mariette, we see her notice the wooden horse, and she's transfixed by it, possibly because it's also a memory she carries. Kay then goes to see Anna, and we see her photographing an insect. Bugs make up a majority of the memories, and in the first film we heard about Rachel's one which centered around a spider. Now she then makes a birthday cake, and it's possible that this is actually Anna's due to it being a 7th birthday party and her being locked up in here when she was 8.
Well, there's a bit of every artist in their work.
Now we learn Anna tries to create happy memories because the replicants have to do such hard work, but this allows them to have something to look back and smile on. Anna being behind glass also carries its own symbolism with it, and through the reflection we get a really interesting shot. As Anna leans into her microscope, Kay is framed behind her, and his reflection's much darker, making him almost appear like a shadow. He very much believes he's her, and thus it makes sense symbolically that he's now living in her shadow. Now Anna says the memory is real, and she'd of course instantly know due to it being one of her own. Kay travels outside of the spot he'll eventually die at, and at this point he then catches a snowflake. This very much carries the true meaning of the movie, and it brings with it a lot of symbolism that builds off the back of the first film. Now in that, Roy Batty famously said that all his memories would be lost like tears in the rain. He died with it pouring down on him, and this mirrors how Kay dies with the snow coming down. Roy died with his head down whilst Kay looks up, and there's also this metaphor laced in the snow and rain. The movie is about one person realizing that they aren't as special as they think, and we could all end up lost like tears in the rain. However, we are all unique, just like every individual snowflake is, and though we'll get lost, we all leave things behind when we pass. Now there is a class system in Blade Runner that tries to pull others down, yet none of us being special, we should all treat each other with kindness. Though we are all our own individual and unique people, we are a collective too, and Kay dying realizing that he isn't special means that he's willing to sacrifice himself to save Deckard and his daughter. Had he thought the opposite, he might not have put himself in harm's way, but he accepts that even though he's unique, he's no better than anyone else. I know people think it's quite a nihilistic viewpoint to have the main character not be the chosen one, but I actually think it carries its own positive meaning that we should be nice to each other because we're no better than they are. Kay realizing that Joy might not really love him ends up leaving him completely deflated, but I think in the end he takes a different viewpoint in becoming the hero. I wanted to add that in here so I'm not just describing the scenes, but yeah, let me know below if you agree or not. Kay is called in after he fails his baseline test, which means that at this point he should be retired. Kay lies though and pretends he's just had a big negative reaction to killing the kid, and Joshi gives him a pass because of the emotional toll it could carry. He's given 48 hours to pass his baseline tests, but upon returning home we find that Joy's hired Mariette. Mariette could be playing on the word marionette, and Joy uses her as a puppet in this scene. This love scene is really astounding, and though they could have easily have cut this out to progress the story, I think it adds so much. The effects are incredible here with both actresses going back and forth, and I think it does show how much Joy really loves Kay. She's gone beyond her programming to actually gain a real attachment to someone, and clearly AI is capable of breaking free of its programming, which Kay also embodies. However, I do think you can totally take this the other way, as we cut to a billboard of Joy saying she's anything you want her to be. This shows that it may just be part of her to do things like this, again calling back to the idea that she's programmed to love him. The book actually did something similar with Rachel, and we learned that she was programmed to sleep with bounty hunters to dissuade them from retiring replicants. Now Mariette places a tracking device in Kay's coat, and this is how later on they're able to track him down. Now there's very much this idea of Pinocchio laced through moments like this, with both being desperate to be a real boy and girl. Personally, I think this really makes you question what it means to be real, because they both seem pretty real to me, but what they mean by that is that they both want to be human. Now just like how Deckard went to a snake salesman in that first film, we see Kay visit a dealer called Dr. Badger. He tells him to head to Las Vegas, and we discover that a dirty bomb was set off there, which was potentially detonated during World War III. Now the orange look of the city was actually inspired by a real life event, and this was meant to mirror the dust storms that hit Sydney in 2009. I love the symbolism that we get here, and as Kay walks through the streets, he sees a giant head missing an eye, similar to how the replicants removed theirs. He comes across beehives, and this could be being used in a similar manner to how they are in German airports. We learn from Dr. Badger that the area is thick with radiation, and bees are actually used to show if there's high levels in the area. Bees also exist in colonies, and they're given the bare minimum to survive so that they can keep everything going. This is similar to humanity, who are now forced to barely get by due to so little resources remaining on the planet. Kay goes looking for Deckard, and his first lines are from Treasure Island.
Mightn't happen to have a piece of cheese about you now.
Now this is actually a nod to the original Blade Runner, and in that there was a deleted scene in which Deckard visited a man named Holden who had been reading it. The line could also be significant due to its meaning in the source material, and in that it's said by the character Ben Gunn, who spent years marooned on an island. Upon seeing another human for the first time, this is what he says, and Ben very much shows these people that he once used to be like them, and that he's what they could become, which I think Deckard's also doing with Kay. He brandishes his old gun from the first film, and chases him into a showroom replaying Elvis's hologram like Tupac at Coachella. This was portrayed by Elvis tribute act Ben Thompson, and his face was then digitally replaced by the real Elvis for the final film. Now Deckard starts punching Kay, and Harrison actually hit Ryan in real life when he was doing this. If you pause on the last one, you can see Ryan's face reacting to it, as well as Ford looking shocked in the background. Whew, smashed it like that like button, are you having that? Now Elvis then cuts in with Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Deckard says he likes this song, and many have read this as meaning that he was a replicant that was programmed to fall in love with Rachel. The pair share a futuristic bottle of Johnny Walker, and this is something that Deckard drank in the first film. Kay spots Deckard's dog, and you might have noticed that it was actually standing in the doorway when the pair first met. Kay says,
"Is it real?" "I don't know. Ask him."
And this is very much tackling the themes of the film, and whether it really matters if the dog is manufactured or not if you can't tell a difference. Now, an amazing bit of attention to detail here comes from Ford. When we cut to Kay drinking, he holds all 4 fingers on the glass like how a normal person would when they were drinking. Ford, however, rests 2 fingers below it, and later on when he looks through his binoculars, we can see the same 2 fingers drop down below it. Cut back to the first film, and these are actually the same 2 fingers that Roy broke at the end of the movie. Deckard tied them up, but he immediately went on the run with Rachel after this, so he never got them properly checked, explaining why they're like this after all this time. Now, you know I love Ford, and I think it's hilarious how a lot of the time he just turns up to movie sets these days like he's just woke up. Man just wears a great t-shirt throughout this film, and I don't even think that he even got his hair cut for Rise of Skywalker. He's a f***ing legend though, and this stuff just adds to his charm. Okay, starts up a jukebox, which plays Frank Sinatra. This was actually inserted as an homage to Bud Yorkin, who produced the first Frank Sinatra film and also the first Blade Runner. Kay then looks over some wooden animals and a photo of Rachel which carries an important meaning. Photos in the first film were coveted by the replicants because of their short lifespans. Photos kept a record that they actually existed, and this showed that they were real. A love forces sweep in, and they do a nice little touch with the dogs, sensing them first before they arrive. Kay ends up running through a marble wall, and yet at no point was I thinking this guy was really a human. Man looked over some code before and read like hundreds of lines of it in seconds, so you're f***ing kidding if you think I was buying any of that shit. Anyway, bested by love, she mercilessly kills Joy and leaves Kay for dead, which is when he's found by the rebels. When they arrive at the city, we also get a nice little touch and see that they've made their home in a church. Here he meets Frazier, and she has the same accent as Anna, tipping us off to her raising her.
It feels authentic, and if you have authentic memories, you have real human responses.
You must want me to look up and to the left. I saw a miracle delivered.
Now she asks Kay to kill Deckard, and the only reason that he was hiding out in Vegas was because Deckard could identify Frazier. She is the only one who could identify Anna, and thus in the end he must be killed. However, Kay ignores this, and he allows Deckard in the end to finally meet his daughter. Now back with Wallace, we see as Deckard meets him for the first time. He grabs his hand, almost like how a priest talks to someone, and asks Deckard where the child is so that he can reverse engineer them. Now we get a playback of his first conversation with Rachel before she walks out of the darkness like she did all those years before.
It's artificial?
Of course it is.
It's artificial?
Of course it is.
Must be expensive. Must be expensive.
Very. Very. I'm Rachel. I'm Rachel.
Deckard. Deckard.
All these years you looked back on that day, drunk on the memory of its perfection.
Wallace then further hints that Deckard was a replicant, but he also throws other possibilities to not ruin it for fans.
Did it never occur to you that's why you were summoned in the first place? Designed to do nothing short of fall for her, right? then and there. All to make that single, perfect specimen. That is, if you were designed.
Now it is possible that the credits actually tell us the truth, and as the names of the cast appear on screen, the replicant ones glitch out and cut. However, Ford's name doesn't, possibly suggesting that he's in fact human. But one thing he does do though, is that he moves back when Deckard goes close to him. He's so used to having everyone obey him that he doesn't know what to do when someone else stands up to him.
Pain reminds you the joy you felt was real.
I think this can also be reflected in Kay, who's just felt the pain of Joy's death, showing that she was real. Rachel is then brought in, but he resists the temptation, and it's at this point I kind of realised that Wallace was more devil than God. Siding with him would very much be a deal with the devil, and he'd be able to control the future of humanity by making replicants that obey him. Interestingly, we do get a moment in which Wallace raises his hand, and this was something that Tyrell did in that first film. Although this looked like a mannerism that Jesus did when we did that breakdown, and it again hammers home this idea of him being holy. Now we get a great moment in which Kay and Deckard both parallel each other. We end the scene with his back turned to the camera, and this then cuts to Kay, who's in the same position. At this point, Kay's presented with an advert for Joy, but she doesn't measure up to what he had, much like how the fake Chell didn't. Fake Chell, now basked in a blue light, he sees Joy and realises that he has to stand for something. Joy also has the tagline, "Everything you want to hear, /C, making him realise that he may have been manipulated. I still like to believe that love was real, but yeah, let me know below. Now the escort heads with Deckard over the sea wall, and in some behind the scenes info, the license plate on Love's car can be scanned to read Philip K. Dick. The rain comes down, and then at this point Deckard notices Kay coming through. Like Roy, his salvations come through the rain, and Kay causes the vehicle to crash, which is when he tackles Love face to face. Love is of course a human emotion, but she's completely devoid of it, showing how twisted Wallace's creations are from what's intended. Now the crash has allowed Deckard's death to be faked, and thus he can go and meet his daughter Anna. Kay's hand is also bandaged up, and this is similar to how Deckard's was at the end of the first movie. He then hands over the horse, and Deckard goes in as he dies on the steps. Really nice bit of attention to detail here, and if you look at the clothes, you can also see they have salt lines on them due to the seawater. Now the ending of this film and the previous one both share similarities, and in both films we follow people who represent oppression. Deckard and Kay are hunters that kill replicants, and initially they don't represent what a hero is. Now the first movie culminates with Roy saving Deckard even though he didn't have to. Deckard was someone who killed the woman he loved and his friends, but he still spared his life because he was better than the humans. This completely flipped Deckard's mind state, and it allowed him to go off and have a life with Rachel. A similar thing happens here with K2, and he saves Deckard so that he can have a life with his child. Like Roy, he decides to be more human than human, and offers salvation when he was tasked with killing Deck by Fraser. He too dies like Roy, but in the end he's made his life mean something by saving another. The entire movie is about Kay searching for humanity, and in the end he finds it by turning from a remorseless killer into someone who's willing to give up his own life in order to protect others. It's a beautiful way to close out, and we end with the same music they used in Roy's death, tying the two films together. We do know that a TV show is in the works called Blade Runner 2099, and it will be interesting to see if we learn what happened with how they left things off, even though all the characters will probably be long dead at that point. Anyway, I'm going to return to the Alien franchise very shortly, as I know a lot of you wanted to torture me with Alien 3. Before that though, I want to do The Exorcist, and after that I think I want to tackle RoboCop, and then we're going to go into the Terminator films, so make sure you stay subscribed for our classic movie breakdowns. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit the thumbs up, and if you missed our Blade Runner breakdown, that's on screen right now. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.